Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. For the last 3.5 years, when Celtic play, we go live half an hour before the game. I am Paul John Dykes, and I'm delighted to be joined this early afternoon by a bleary-eyed James Mackenzie, the youth of today, burning the candle at both ends. But you're here, James, and it's great to see you. How are you feeling about today's trip to Perth?
Yeah, you're hoping for a response. It's not the first time this season, I don't think, where supporters have been going into that game looking for a response for this Celtic team. But this is the second time this season where Celtic have gone 2 games in all competitions without a win. And when the expectation at Celtic is to win every single week, every single game that comes by, it feels a bit strange when Celtic aren't winning. So having a return to form, a return to winning ways today will be important against a tough team. He didn't have the greatest of starts to the season. St Johnstone, I remember, Stirling Albion and Stenhousemuir both beat them in the cup group stages,
Yeah.
and that all sort of built up to Stephen McLean eventually getting the sack. But Craig Levein has steered them from the bottom of the Cinch Premiership. Livingston's free fall has contributed to that as well, but 4 points from the 3 games he's been in charge is a bit of a change in fortunes for the Perth side. So it will be a tough game. We know what Craig Levein teams set up like. They are going to be organised. They are going to be hard to break down. But I'm just hoping for a good performance, a comprehensive performance as well.
It's a double whammy for me because you're right. Craig Levein would normally set his side up like that, but the added incentive for him is that he's taken over a team that basically the remit is stay up. And against a team like Celtic, the way that he'll do that is by defending in numbers. You know, you'll have the two big blocks of four at the back. We will be faced with something that's becoming quite familiar, James, in that we'll probably have 80% plus possession of the ball today. A lot of that will be in the final third, and it'll be about finding a way to break them down. Now, you've been talking all week about various aspects of the Celtic side that haven't really clicked in recent weeks. And one of them, of course, is the lack of goals from Kyogo Furuhashi. I'm not throwing him under the bus because I think, again, there are circumstances around these performances. One being that we aren't really, I don't think, playing to his strengths at the moment, James. Can we change that?
I think you've got to get him more involved in the game. I don't think he's a player that needs a certain style of play to get the best out of him because he's too good of a player to need that. He's not a system player. We've seen so many moments of individual brilliance in his time at Celtic so far to prove that point. I mean, you've just got to look at the Derby Ibrox earlier in the season, where our backs were against the wall for basically 90 minutes. But one moment is all it needs, and it can change a game or a knife edge. But you have to get him more involved in the game. I think when you look at the game last week against Motherwell, you're not really playing to his strengths. The high balls aren't going to work when it's Kyogo Furuhashi and amongst Motherwell centre backs, the likes of Bevis Mugabe and others who we know are pretty towering figures. Kyogo's not going to be able to get anything out of those guys. So you're looking for a bit more from the wide players, even just getting them on the ball more. Just get the ball to him because, as I mentioned earlier, he's got the individual quality to make something happen out of nothing. He's played on the wing, so he knows how to play a more creative role. He's more than just a finisher. He's a versatile player. We've seen that across his career. You just need to get him involved in the game more. I was looking at his stats from the last sort of few games because it felt like in every single sort of team ratings article I was doing for the blog that I was giving Kyogo a 5 or a 6. It was always every week. It was a quiet game, a quiet game, a quiet game, and you're looking for a bit more. I think it's 1 goal in his last 8 games in all competitions for Celtic this season, which, if you look at his stats in the league as a whole, he's averaging a goal every second game, which for most Celtic strikers, that would be fine. That would be a pretty acceptable record, but we know how good he can be. We saw last season, like I checked the stat for last season, I think it was 1.5 goals every 90 minutes. So there is still a drop-off there as much as it is still a decent stat. So you're looking to get him involved as much as possible. Hopefully get him on the score sheet today.
Get him involved, and you will get him on the score sheet, James. That much is almost basic arithmetic. It's when you look at the games and you're an hour into the game and they're looking at least, this is a new stat that has been added onto the obviously the analysis on the live games, the least amount of touches on the park. Kyogo's always in it. You know, he's always had 4 or 5 touches of the ball. You get him the ball, he'll link midfield to attack. He will be the guy that comes deep. He'll make things happen. And like you said, it seems almost like too basic a thing to say, but the type of ball that we're delivering into the box isn't suited to him. And a massive part of that is the physicality. It's the nature of very many teams in the league who will have 2 towering defenders, not particularly great footballers, James, but they'll win headers. You know, they'll throw their weight into any kind of opposition attack. And Kyogo doesn't really fare too well in that scenario. We've seen so many times where either our overlapping fullbacks or indeed the wingers hitting the lines and playing in low, sharp balls at pace. And Kyogo loves that because he's got the control. He can finish them. He can hit them on the volley. It's not a case of a defender just putting his toe on it because Kyogo's quicker than them. And I think that we've seen a lot less of that under Brendan Rodgers. And there was a few comments in yesterday and the day before's YouTube video where they were saying, oh, so you're blaming Rodgers on Kyogo's lack of form. No, we're not blaming Rodgers. We're saying that the style of football doesn't seem to be affecting positively Kyogo at this moment in time. Now, Jungle Lion, we were talking on the old X platform, I still call it Twitter, I can't get out of the habit, about Brian McLeish. And I'm glad you reminded me. I won't forget the Chalky story. Brian McLeish is a massive music fan, if you don't already know. Whenever you meet him, he's normally wearing a music or a band T-shirt of some description, be that the Pogues, the Clash, or any number of obscure bands that you've maybe not even heard of. And we used to do an event quite regularly up at the Greenock CSC. Big shout out to anyone from that part of the world. It is one of the best Celtic supporters clubs I have ever visited. And I've not been for a while, actually, but we've done a night there with Brian McLeish, the one and only Chalky. And he turned up for said event maybe 15 minutes before he was due to get on the stage. And he'd met a few pals in the town, James, for a few sherbets. And that's fine, but by me, because Chalky is great entertainment. And we go on the stage every single time during the event at halftime. We would get a pile of questions from the audience, a pile written down in the old-fashioned way, and I would hand them to whoever the player was who was a special guest to go through them and say, right, I'm no answering that, I'm no answering that. Because, you know, they were quite close to the bone a lot of the time. And the same handwriting would appear on a card every single time. What is your favourite Rebel song? It was the same writing. It was quite a distinguishable handwriting. And I remember every single player we had spoken to, be it Paddy McCourt, Rab Douglas, John Hartson, I think Tomo, loads of them, they would all put that to the side. I'm no answering that, right? So I went to Chalky at halftime, right? I've got a pile of questions here from the audience. Normally people, the players will go through them. I'll answer them all. And he went for a wee swally. Great stuff. By this point, second half, Chalky's in the audience, walking about with the mic, talking to people, answering questions. He was absolutely phenomenal. It comes to that particular question with that particular handwriting. And I say, who is it in the crowd that keeps writing this? Obviously, the player's not going to answer it. And I know, Brian McLeish, you're a massive music fan, so I'm going to put a twist on this question. The question actually is, what's your favourite Rebel song? But I'm not going to ask you that, Brian. I'm going to ask you, what's your favourite song? I know you're a massive music fan. And his answer was the Merry Ploughboy. So that's Brian McLeish for you. Brian McLeish, who James McKenzie models himself on from 1986 at Love Street with that beautiful Barnet. That's the story, Jungle Lion. He's a great spud, is Chalky, and I would like to do something else with him in 2024. Stephen Sloan, come on, Celtic. No side-to-side passing today. We need 90 minutes of attacking football. Let's see goals, goals, goals. When I look at the starting 11, I'm going to read it out for anyone who hasn't seen it yet. I can see this being a very attacking 11, if indeed we play to that style. So we've got Joe Hart in goals, Johnstone at right back, Taylor at left back, with Carter Vickers and Scales in the middle, McGregor, O'Reilly, Turnbull, Yang, Palmer, Kyogo. That's a start 11, James, that could get goals, goals, goals today, couldn't it?
Yeah, I'm thinking, I look at that starting 11, the first thing I thought of was, I went 11 for 11 my team predictions on the blog. Then I actually started to look at how the team could actually shape up. And is it the strongest team we have available at the moment? If you're looking at fitness and factors like that, I think it probably is.
Yeah.
Which I think there's players who I'd be looking for to step up because, as we said, we've not won in the last 2 games, so there needs to be a bit of a spark from somewhere. And I think you're looking at the wide areas. That's where you're looking to see some real improvements, because if you look at the last league game at Motherwell, the wide players were really quiet, like your Palmers and Yang. They both had really quiet games. And then I go back to the draw against St Johnstone even earlier in the season. One of the problems on that day as well, and why we couldn't really create much on the day, was because the wide players were anonymous. So that's two instances where we've dropped points, and that's been a common denominator amongst those performances. So I'm looking for a bit more from the wide men. I'm happy to see David Turnbull in the team in the midfield. I think I was surprised that he wasn't in the team on Tuesday evening, to be honest. I thought he'd done enough to merit a place in that team. And I'd rather had him play than a lone player that I don't think we're going to go after once his loan expires. But David Turnbull, he's tied for top scorer in the league. And he's started, I think, 7 or 8 games, and he's got 7 goals.
Incredible record.
He's a really valuable player to have, which is why I'm always so confused when people seem so eager to sell him. I mean, he's someone who's really good in the close control, tight areas. He can pick a goal out of nowhere when you're in a tough spot. That's a really valuable asset to have in a team. And he's actually a decent penalty taker, which when you look at the options we have available for taking penalties, it's really slim pickings. So even just having him on the field for something like that, should a penalty pop up or something, he's an incredibly valuable player to have. I saw the AC Milan rumours have been rubbished the day after the day after they came out. I think David Turnbull's good enough to play for a sort of lower Premier League club, but I saw that and I thought it was a bit ridiculous. 8 million for someone with 6 months left on the deal was never going to happen. But I'd rather Celtic kept David Turnbull than lost him. I'll say that on him.
Well, the thing with Turnbull for me, going back to the rumours around Italy, if you go right back, probably even on the blog, I'd need to look at it myself, but when I was talking about Turnbull leaving the club, it's really down to the fact that he was a mainstay in Ange's team right up until the injury in the League Cup. And then after that, he struggled to get back in the side. And he struggled throughout last season to get a run in the side. When Brendan Rodgers came in, and it looked as though, for whatever reason, he didn't think Hatate was going to fit his model, or there was maybe issues with the player's future at that point. I'm not so sure. But he starts with Turnbull this season. And you think to yourself, James, this is going to be the resurrection of David Turnbull at Celtic. Because he's a player that I've got a lot of sympathy for. When you think back to when we signed him, and at that point, he is arguably the best young footballer in Scottish football at that time. And this is at a stage where his contemporaries are going to Italy. You know, you've got guys like Doig and Hickey and Ferguson all doing really well. Obviously, Henderson was the progenitor of all these Scottish guys going over there. But his clutchy players from his era, if you like, are over there. And Hickey has shown that not only can you go over and make a fist of things over in Italy, you can earn yourself a bigger move, which he has done. It looks as though Lewis Ferguson's going to do the same. Doig has had interest from bigger Italian clubs. And I remember saying at the beginning of this season that Turnbull's style of play probably would suit the Italian game. And the very fact that, not only the record that you've already described, we were playing Lazio in Italy during the week. I felt to myself, because I've got it in my mind, he is a kind of Italian style player. He would do really well in that game. So I was surprised that he was left out. But it was Kevin Graham who actually brought up a very good point, because we know how the loan system works, James, and you know that we shouldn't have really been panicking to bring in a midfield player. You know, I can understand us agreeing to terms with Nat Phillips that ordinarily we wouldn't have agreed to, because we were so desperate for a centre-half. Get him in. Right, okay, part of that deal is he's part of the first team squad whenever he's fit. I think that's probably in the contract, and that's why Phillips is always there, even though you've got a £3 million player in Lagerbielke who isn't on the bench today, even though you've got a £4.3 million player in Nurovsky who, despite his injury woes, is not on the bench today. It's Nat Phillips. So you think to yourself, right, Phillips has got something in his contract until January. He'll be on the bench, even though we've spent the best part of £7.5 million on 2 centre-halves. But the interesting one for me is Bernardo, because more often than not, when it comes to the Champions League, he started. And I know he didn't start the game that Hatate was injured in, but when you're looking at the bench, he's the guy that Rodgers turned to. And Turnbull must be really frustrated at that, in effect, because he'll be sitting there thinking to himself, Charlie Nicholas style, am I only good enough to get a goal against Livy or get a goal against Aberdeen or St Johnstone? He wants to play in the biggest stage possible. The international draw for the Euros, I know you're a big fan of international football, that's made. Players like Turnbull will be thinking, right, there's my target. I want to be in that squad by the summer. And how does he get in the squad? He needs game time. So we're in a quandary with David Turnbull. There is no doubt in his ability, and no doubt he'll show it again today. No doubt in his ability.
We can't forget he was in the Scotland squad for Euro 2021. He was in the squad. He'd broke through during that COVID season at Celtic, was the shining light in the team. And he was expected to new heights. I don't know if he made an appearance at the Euros, but I remember him doing well in a friendly before it, and everybody was raving about him. Oh, thank goodness David Turnbull is in this Scotland squad. And now where is he? His career's stagnated, and it's not his fault. He didn't lose his place in the team on merit. He didn't lose it based on his performances. It was just bad luck. Even when he was at Motherwell, I think the season before we meant to sign him, they'd scored 16 goals from midfield in a Motherwell team. That's
astonishing. What age was he? 19?
It would have been 19, 20.
Yeah,
so I remember like Young Player of the Year that season as well. It was a crazy good season.
Yeah. And the thing is, James, if he does that, excuse me, if he does that right now, Celtic are interested in him as a player of interest come January. He was a shining light at Motherwell. Celtic signed him up. He went through real physical and mental torture to win the move that was snatched away from him. He eventually gets it, as you say. He breaks into the team under Lenny. He's a mainstay under Ange. He breaks into the Scottish international squad. But he will be looking at that situation this week, James, and he'll be thinking, right, I need to do that. And players have to be selfish sometimes. They really do. And it's not always about the money. I mean, there's a lot of speculation around Rocco Vata right now. And if you go into the social media channels, I was delighted that Anthony Joseph confirmed Rocco Vata's not been offered a new deal by Celtic. It's not like he's one of these young guys who's a contract rebel, James, who's like, oh, I'm just going to wait for Liverpool to come in like Ben Doak. He's not. He's absolutely not. This is a player who's not been offered a contract. He's been frozen out. That's another discussion. But David Turnbull will be looking at other aspects of his career and thinking to himself, right, I'm 24 years of age. This is the ideal time for me to be starring at the Euros against these nations. And unfortunately, it might result in him leaving the club. The AC Milan rumours, it didn't surprise me he was linked with an Italian team, James. I think maybe the calibre of the team surprised me a wee bit, but the transfer fee surprised me even more. That was never going to happen, like you say. Is it his agent? Is it his agent and it's maybe putting it out there? Does Turnbull want to play in Italy?
He'd have 6 months left on his contract at the time. And I remember when Ryan Christie moved to Bournemouth with 6 months left on his deal, we got $2.5 million and we thought that was a coup. And no offence to Turnbull, I've just spent the last 5 minutes defending him, but Ryan Christie at that point was a better player and a more important player to Celtic than Turnbull is now. So I don't think there's any chance we reel in £8 million for David Turnbull.
No. And by the way, I think that there were 2 players that we lost that I would have liked to have seen under Ange, and Christie was one of them.
Absolutely.
The other one was El Yunusi. I thought El Yunusi would have done really well under Ange Postecoglou as well, but he was out the door. So yeah, Turnbull is in there today. His record speaks for itself. I want to just touch a wee bit on the loanees. We're 20 minutes into the show. We've read out the team. On the bench are Scott Bain, Nat Phillips, Odin Thiago Home. We've got Tremoki, Bernardo, Forrest, Ralston, and Mikey Johnstone. So we've got the 2 loanees on the bench here, right? And Bernardo was brought in. And I think the unusual thing about him coming in is that if you look at the squad, particularly at the start of the season when he actually joined the club, midfield was a position I had my least concern about. And then we bring in Home, and I can see exactly why. He is the archetypal project player, a player that over the next 12 to 18 months will get the kind of level of game time that he's had already, and I would expect him to progress. He's not a first-team regular pick for the starting 11, but he'll get plenty of game time, and he will progress into what I think will be a great player. Bernardo, I'm a wee bit bemused about, because I don't think we needed another midfielder in there. I think you've got a player in Iwata who is owned by Celtic and who has basically been frozen out this season as well as a result of Bernardo being in there. And I feel a bit sorry for Iwata because he's now on that list of mine that I expect him to just leave now because he's not getting games, James. I mean, even when there's opportunities, he's not getting games, is he?
Yeah, it's a shame because he came to the club as J-League MVP. None of Celtic's other Japanese players that have done far better here than he has had won that award. So I don't know if he's just not shown something in training because he's not really set the world alight when he's been on the park. He's not. I can't really point to a Tomoki Iwata performance from the bench, but I've been like, he should be starting because of that performance. I've seen a performance from the bench where he's been, oh, that was good. He was solid when he came on, but it's never been enough to warrant he should be starting this game, I don't think. And you're seeing the same thing with Bernardo. He's playing all right when he plays. It's decent, but are you really going to be screaming and shouting for Celtic to pay the fee for Paul Bernardo at the end of his loan spell? I don't think so. But I think the midfield is one of the strongest positions we have on the park. I'd say if you had to lay out Celtic's strongest 11 and say where's the strongest position on the park, it would be the midfield. You had McGregor, O'Reilly, Hatate trio. That's the strongest position we have on the park. But I don't think we need many more options there. And if we end up moving on in Iwata or we don't get Bernardo, or if the nightmare scenario and Matt O'Reilly moves on either in January or next summer,
I'm clipping that.
we'll
You're not
need
allowed
to
to say
sign.
that on Acsom. You can't even mention it, right? It's like there's a few people you can't mention on this show. One signed for the other side in 1989. You cannot mention O'Reilly leaving Celtic. That's a rule.
Well, I
Right.
think Bernardo was signed. He was signed. I'm certain he's got an option to buy in his contract, and I think we'd expected him to be a bit better than he has been so far. And I think he was eventually supposed to be a real Hatate replacement. I think they
Right.
expected Hatate to either move on this summer or next summer, but Hatate's injuries can put him to the wayside. And now it's going to be who do we replace Matt O'Reilly with next summer. I think they were preparing to replace someone big next summer, and it looks like it's shifted.
Matt O'Reilly, of course, is the star of the Starting 11 graphic, wearing a Christmas jersey, no less. What I would say, James, about that, right? If you rewind to season 1 under Ange, we bring in 2 loanees. I know that we eventually brought in Maeda and it was a loan with an obligation to buy, similar to the Iwata deal, but we bring in 2 loanees in CCV and Jota. One a centre-half from a Premiership side in England and one a promising winger from Benfica. That was season 1. And there's similarities to this season in that we've brought in 2 loanees. One is a centre-half from a Premiership club and one is a promising midfield player from Benfica. Now, in terms of the transfer fees that these teams would command, there has been a suggestion that Bernardo would actually be in the same ballpark as Jota, £6 million. I don't put him in that bracket. If you were to try and sign like any centre-half from Liverpool, you're probably looking at that same figure that you'd sign for CCV. So what you've got now, we're in a situation where we've got 2 players in on loan. A decision will need to be made on them. And this word quality, which has been used and bandied about by Brendan Rodgers, no less, you look at the quality of these 2 loanees compared to the 2 loanees in Ange's first season, James, and I'm sorry, they're nowhere near the same quality.
Yeah, you've got to think that. You look at the money we paid for Jota and Carter Vickers, I think most fans would agree that that's the sort of ballpark we should be looking at in transferring those for signing players anyway. Players, because you're getting them a better quality than you would if you paid £3 million for them. But I think they'd shown a lot more in their loan spells as well. Your Jotas and your Cam and Carter Vickers, they'd become starting players. They'd become important to the point where Celtic didn't need to sign them. They had to sign them because of the importance that they'd built up. They built up a solid place in the team, and I think these loan players are going to do that. They were signed as stopgap players. They were signed just to sort of fill a hole in the team. Now, I don't really see the need for Celtic to pursue a permanent move for any of them at the moment, unless Bernardo can show something incredible. Because we can't forget he is 21. He's still a young player. There could be room for him to completely change around his trajectory at Celtic. You never know.
He's had the games. He's had the big games. You know, he's started more games in the Champions League than he has in the Scottish Premiership, which is bizarre. Yeah, we don't know what the nuances of the contracts are. Maybe we'll find out after the event. You said this is the strongest side that we can field today. I agree with that. When everybody's fit, though, James, what do you think the strongest team is? Would you look at perhaps Turnbull for Hatate? Would Yang drop for Maeda or Abada? There's maybe only a question around 2 of those starters today, isn't there?
Yeah, if you're looking at the strongest 11 that I think we can field with everybody fit, that'd be good. I'd be going Joe Hart, Alistair Johnson, Carter Vickers, Scales, Taylor. Midfield, you have McGregor, Hatate, O'Reilly. And then up front, you'd have Kyogo with Palmer. I'll go Palmer and Abada. Palmer and Abada on the wings is what I'm going to go in my strongest team. I think I was on the fence last time you asked me this with Abada and Maeda, and I've sided with Abada here.
Yeah, I think Abada's season, it's the kind of like recency bias, isn't it? You know, you're looking at Abada's season and he's not a great season through injury.
Go back to the first season under Ange, even in the Europa League, there was a point where the fans needed a bit of hope from some of the signings, and just spoke on the pressure of every signing needing to hit the ground running. I remember, I know we lost the tie to Midtjylland over that 2 legs, but Abada scoring on his first Celtic start gave the fans a bit of hope of, oh, I've got a young player who could maybe do something.
Yeah.
There's little things like that created all the belief in that season. And I think you've got to recognise Abada's knack for stepping up a big game, whether it be an important cup match or a derby, or even in the Europa League. He didn't really get a proper run at it in the Champions League last season. I think he only got 2 or 3 starts. But in the Europa League, I thought he was absolutely fantastic. I'd have him up there as a European caliber player. You've just got to look at the teams who have scouted him, the teams who have been interested in his time at Celtic, and he's a good finisher. He's a solid clinical finisher.
Yeah, he's dead.
Quality you really need. You've just got to look at the success Scott Sinclair had at Celtic, even when he wasn't playing at his best, how important it is to have a player that'll get you a goal when you're not at the top of your game.
100%. I think, and he's got that ability that is often illustrated by football tweets where he can ghost in at the back post. Apologies to anyone who has watched me suffering over the last week. Unfortunately, I've been hit with old COVID, and I look like a cross between Nosferatu and Jack Skellington. People might in the comments say you already did, Paul, but thanks for that, ladies and gents. A couple of wee mentions before we get into the action. We've got Patrick Heaney. Rather see a Watt in the team than McGregor, with McGregor rather pushed on a bit. McGregor's worst wee spell for us lately. I pitched that to our data man, Alan Morrison, who doesn't think McGregor's got the legs now to be the offensive force. So that's maybe why that's not happening. Kenny67, it is a poor reflection on the quality of the squad when Taylor and Yang are still being selected in the first 11, despite their inconsistency. Not a good message to the players either. Well, there's no other options, really, particularly at left-back. You know, Taylor, Bernabe's not even on the bench today. And I'm not having it that Scales can move there. Scales looked like a mediocre player when played at left-back. The reason he's playing so well is because he's playing in his best position. Taylor again, facepalm, Danny Boy. I think we can improve, but who else do you start today?
I mean, I'm a pretty harsh critic of Greg Taylor. I have been, and I've been accused of being that for basically my entire time on Acsom. But I think in the Champions League, that's the only place where you can say he's put a foot wrong. Domestically, since about the middle of September, Greg Taylor has been just fine. He's been a solid option there. I don't think you can get on it, Greg Taylor, for dropping points against Motherwell last weekend or anything like that. I think we do need to replace him. You do need a better player there for the European games, but domestically, I think he's just fine.
Yeah. And the big thing is we don't have the option. Bernabe's not the answer. He's been an absolute flop and he will be leaving the club sooner rather than later, actually, for the best of all parties. James Floyd. Will the real Celtic please stand up? Come on, dust those cobwebs off. And Michael Ross. Yeah, Lagerbielke, Norowski. They got us £8 million. Why? Well, I'm going to put it out there. Brendan Rodgers couldn't possibly come into this football club for the second time and say, I've not signed any of these guys that are coming in the pre-season. What he's done is he's supported not only the board that have just appointed him as the manager, he's supporting the players that are in the door. Imagine he says these guys are not mine and he washed his hands with them. There's obvious players that he would have more involvement in, and there's other ones who the deals would have been already way down the line. So Brendan Rodgers has obviously been very cute when it comes to taking ownership of the signing of those players, James. But you know what? At this moment in time, Nawrocki, jury's out because he's been injured. He obviously doesn't fancy Lagerbielke, does he?
Yeah, clearly isn't the biggest fan of him, but it's funny, you'll always see a manager take credit for a top signing, but when it comes to a player who flops, it's always...
I know. Van Dijk, he was mine. Miku, no, I had nothing to do with Miku.
It was a board signing. It wasn't Brendan Rodgers.
Absolutely. Aye, of course, you'd do the same. So would I. Right. I mean, although all those brilliant Acsom contributors, it was all my doing. What about the bad ones? Nothing to do with me. Right. I'm joking. There's not been any bad ones. Let's get to the action. St Johnstone versus Celtic. Thank you, everybody, for getting involved in the comment section. And thank you once again to James Mackenzie for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.